So I thought I'd start today with a very, very brief summary of the context. I'm sure that many of you know about the 7th century, but just in case, just so we're all on the same page, I want to start with that. So I'll bring us back several centuries. Good, it works. So this is basically what the Middle East looks like in roughly 71, year 71 of the Hijri calendar and 690 AD. So it's right in the middle of the period I'm studying. The previous few decades have been hugely transformative. Before then, the two major powers in the Middle East were the Sassanid Empire, based in Iraq and Iran, and the Byzantine or Eastern Roman Empire in the Mediterranean. In the 630s, we have, of course, this incredibly powerful religious movement from the Arabian Peninsula. The Sassanid Empire has been absorbed into the Islamic Caliphate, and then the first armies of Islam have gained control of the predominantly Christian regions of the Levant and Egypt. And it's important to note that the majority of people living in these regions retained their former religions at this stage. So in the coastline in Syria and Lebanon and these areas, most people were still Christians, and in Iraq and Iran, they were predominantly Zoroastrians. So, and of course, just over the frontier of the Umayyad capital in Damascus, Byzantium survives in a much reduced form, continues to be the major external opponent. So the particular period I'm wanting to talk about, which is broadly a period that spans from Muayyad ibn Abi Sufyan's rise to the Caliphate in 661 or 41 in the Hijri calendar, to the major advance against Constantinople, about 717, or the year 99, 100. This period is very important because it's at this point that we start to see the consequences of these dramatic changes unfold. You start to see people living throughout the Middle East trying to grapple with the question of what this incredible change means theologically. You start to see as well the question of Muslim identity battled out. And we see both states, Byzantium and the Umayyad Caliphate, transforming administratively. And it's only after the close of the second fitna of Islam in roughly 71 AH or 690 AD that we began to see a distinctively Arabizing style of rule emerge in Syria. So it's after this point that the Umayyad caliphs issue aniconic coins featuring Quranic verses in direct contrast to the Roman-style issues of Muawiyah. And there are reports that they also advanced Arabic as the official language of administration in place of Greek. So this is broadly the summary of the context that I am working with. So clearly in this very, very new, uncertain climate, diplomacy between the two major states of the Mediterranean, Byzantium and the Umayyad Caliphate, became a very, very important part of the political landscape. There are a few ways to think about diplomacy here. We could think of it first as official diplomatic relations between the courts of Damascus and Constantinople. Although the source material is often very, very difficult to interrogate for a number of reasons, which I will not go into now, we do have various descriptions of envoys in various contexts, and they are sufficient to give us a picture of ongoing interaction in this period between the two courts. The extract shown on the screen most probably reflects a standard procedure. Many of the features that stand out here, including the creation of copies of the peace treaty, exchanges of oaths, and exchanges of gifts, emulate the standard procedure in the 6th century and earlier. So it hints at the existence of a protocol and mutual recognition for diplomatic norms of antiquity. So if that's one way to look at the question, it's equally important, I think, to consider negotiations of the local populations on the ground, particularly the fringes of the Umayyad Caliphate, the role that this played. And this role occupied a very uncertain place between the two empires. They had occupied a very uncertain place between the two empires throughout this century. So it had been quite an important part of earlier 7th century history as well. in the earlier stages of Islamic expansion, vast stretches of former Roman and Sassanid empires had submitted by peace agreement, so after negotiations with local elites rather than through simple military conquest. And so these kinds of exchanges continue to be important throughout the Umayyad period for both sides. And here I want to highlight the example of Armenia in particular, which occupied a very uncertain place in this period. It had nominally submitted itself to Islamic rule at a very early stage, but there overall is very little evidence to suggest a substantial Umayyad presence before the early 8th century. In the 7th century, it arguably did use a cliched term, form something of a buffer zone between the two empires, and we can also say that it was comparatively wealthy, but the whole 7th century has been described as a golden age of Armenian architecture. On screen is the particularly striking example of Zvartnots Cathedral. So the question is, how did the two states attempt to negotiate with this the population in this very uncertain period? So to sum up now, the diplomatic landscape on the frontiers is extremely complex. What I hope to do over the course of the next 3 years is demonstrate how the relationship between these two states and the populations on the ground transformed, and whether this can be connected to the reforms of the Umayyad Caliphate and their major achievements, some of which are on screen in the form of the Dome of Rock and aniconic coinage. And that's all I have time for today, so I'll stop there. Thank you.